In the Apache Wink distribution, there are going to be a number of different folders that have files of interest. In the dist directory, this is where the main Apache Wink code lies. There is the Wink 1.0 incubating jar, which contains essentially the superset of all of the other smaller jars, which can be packaged individually to reduce the size of the Wink distribution. There's the lib directory, which contains all of the binary prereqs that could be needed in order to install Apache Wink on a variety of different servers. We're going to be using a subset of those for installation on top of WebSphere. And then there's the extension directories. Here, Apache Wink ships a set of provider jar files that are Apache Wink built, plus a lib directory which contains some of the binary prereqs. So let's build our own sample application now. We'll start out with using Rational Application Developer to build a dynamic web project. We'll call the web project WAS Wink. Now I'll seed the web project with some class files that I wrote a little earlier, just to make this a little bit easier of a sample. And there's essentially going to be 4 different class files. On those class files are going to need the Wink prerequisites. So what we'll essentially do is we'll take a look at the Apache Wink distribution, and we'll grab the common and the server jar files, which contain essentially the necessary jar files in order to run on the server. Next, what we'll do is we'll essentially take some of the binary prereqs, but since many of these ship as part of WebSphere version 7, the only 2 that we really need is going to be the JSR 3.11 support and then the SLF4J APIs, which are essentially used for trace and debugging. Since the JDK contains Java util logins classes, we'll use the SLF4J JDK14 library as part of the APIs underneath the SLF4J APIs. And that's pretty much the necessary prereqs in order to run the existing sample. Now we need to do a couple of other things in order to prepare this web application. First is we need to seed the web application with necessary router war file that's used for JAX-RS JSR 3.11 applications. And I coded up a little web.xml snippet as part of that. So essentially there's the Apache Wink REST servlet, and in the REST servlet it points to the sample application classes, which essentially contain the list of classes that contain the JAX-RS resources. The servlet mapping is going to be essentially taking everything under that URL pattern. So pretty much everything in this particular web application is essentially going to be a JAX-RS servlet or necessary related classes. Now because we're using the /star pattern, one of the other things that we actually have to do is we're going to have to go into the WebExt extension directory, and in there we're going to have to disable file serving. And that will, if you do not do that, then you're essentially going to have a warning file show up. And that should be about it. So let's take a quick look at the classes before we start. I have a people class, which is essentially a collection of people, persons. A person class, which basically is going to contain a name, and I've added XML root element annotations to both of those. I have a sample application, which is essentially a simple application which extends the JAX-RS application subclass, and it lists a single resource, sample resource, as part of that. And then I have a sample JAX-RS resource, which is essentially contains a small little static table containing 2 people, Bill and Bob, as part of that people collection. And there's essentially going to be 2 main resources. One, to return the collection of people, and then 2, to return the individual people itself. And then if not, it's going to return a not found. And of course, it produces essentially application XML. So under the covers, this is going to use JAX-B in order to essentially deploy the application. So let's now add that application to our server. We'll go ahead and publish the server with that application. Now that that application is published on the server, let's start throwing a little test at it. We'll start by using Poster, which is essentially a Firefox extension to issue web requests in order to test our sample application. The application is going to be going to our WAS-Wink WAR file, and the resource is going to be called sample to get the collection of people back. We'll issue the GET request, and you'll see we're getting essentially the contents back of people, and then there's two people. There's Bill, one of the persons, and then Bob, the other person. Now I could actually ask for Bill or Bob independently, and it will return Bill back. And if I ask for a name that's not there, like myself, Greg, I'm essentially going to get a 404 back. Very simple. Now, what the other thing we're essentially going to do is we're going to go back and take a look at what it's like to add Jettison to the support in order to use the JSON capabilities underneath JAX-B. So I'll go back to my same web application, and in the lib directory I need to drag over the Jettison provider for Apache Wink, which is in the extension directory, and we'll just drag that over. And then we will drag the Jettison libraries over that are necessary. And in this case, we already have the Stacks APIs, so we just need the Jettison prereq binary. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to add the /application/JSON to the sample itself. Republish that application. And now that that application is being republished, we can go back and take a look at our Bill and Bob collection. But for this one, we're essentially going to add an accept header of application/JSON. We'll go ahead and issue the issue, and now we're actually getting JSON back. So it's essentially using the Jettison Stacks provider underneath the JAX-B runtimes. The last thing I'm going to show you is because we're using SLF4J in the way we've had this integrated in the WebSphere. If you go to your WebSphere console and you open up troubleshooting and logs and trace, take a look at our server in diagnostic trace, and take a look at what's there in the runtime, and look at the log level details, you will see that, looking for org Apache, that the Wink classes show up. So you can actually turn Apache Wink tracing on as part of the log and debug as a standard normal WAS debug itself. Well, that's all that I have for today. Thank you very much.